The clock on the mantel did not just tick, it throbbed. To Elias, each sound felt like a slow, steady heartbeat, one that refused to stop, even though everything else in his life felt finished. Tick, throb. Tick, throb. The sound filled the room, pressing against his ears, reminding him that time was still moving forward, even if he no longer was. Elias sat quietly in his high-backed velvet chair near the fireplace. The chair had once been deep red, rich and proud, but now the color had faded into a dull brown. The fabric was thin in places, worn down by decades of sitting, waiting, and remembering. This chair had seen more of his life than most people ever had. It had held him during laughter, grief, and long nights when sleep refused to come. His hands rested on his knees. They were no longer strong hands. Blue veins rose like thin ropes beneath fragile skin, spotted with age and time. These were the same hands that once carried heavy boxes, held tools, wrote letters, and cradled dreams. Now they barely moved, as if even they were tired of the journey. Outside the tall, arched window, the valley lay hidden beneath a blanket of gray mist. The fog rolled slowly across the land, soft and quiet, like a final goodbye. Trees stood still, their leaves painted in shades of gold, orange, and deep red. It was autumn, the season that pretends to be beautiful while preparing the world for death. Elias watched the scene without blinking. "Another day," he whispered, his voice dry and cracked. "Another sunset I didn't ask for." He was 89 years old. To the rest of the world, Elias was just an old man living alone at the edge of a small village. People passed his house without noticing it. Children didn't know his name. Adults only remembered him as the old fellow by the hill. No one knew the weight he carried inside. But inside his mind, Elias was still a traveler. He no longer traveled across countries or cities. Those days were long gone. Now he traveled through memories, through moments he wished he could change, through words he never said, through choices he made too quickly or too late. His mind wandered through the long corridors of regret, opening doors he had locked years ago. His eyes drifted to the small side table beside him. There sat a golden pocket watch. It was old, but well cared for, its surface scratched from years of use. Elias reached for it slowly, lifting it with care, as if it might break under the weight of his touch. He opened the lid. The watch still worked. It always had. This watch had been a gift from his father on his 20th birthday. Elias remembered that day clearly. The sun had been bright. His future felt endless. His father had placed the watch in his hand and closed Elias's fingers around it. "Time is a thief, Elias," his father had said gently. "It doesn't steal your money. It steals the moments you think you'll have tomorrow." At 20, Elias had laughed. He thought time was an infinite ocean. He believed he could swim forever without ever reaching the shore. He thought life would always wait for him. Love, dreams, family, happiness. He assumed they would all be there when he was ready. But time never waits. Now, at 89, Elias felt that laughter burn in his chest. He wanted to scream, not at the clock, not at the world, but at his younger self, the boy who thought he had all the time in the world. He remembered the opportunities he ignored because he was too busy, the letters he never answered, the people he loved but never told, the risks he was afraid to take. Faces floated through his mind, his parents, long gone, friends whose voices he could no longer remember clearly, a woman whose smile once made his heart race. He had promised himself he would return to them later. Later never came. The clock continued its slow rhythm. Tick, throb. Elias leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Each breath felt borrowed. He wondered how many he had left. Days? Weeks? Months? Time no longer felt like an ocean. It felt like a single drop, hanging, ready to fall. He opened his eyes again and looked toward the window. The mist was beginning to lift. A thin line of sunset broke through the clouds, painting the sky in soft gold. For a moment, the valley looked peaceful, beautiful. Elias felt something unexpected, gratitude. Despite everything, he was still here. He could still see the sunset. He could still feel the weight of the watch in his hand. He could still remember. Maybe that was time's final gift, not more moments, but the chance to understand the ones that mattered. He closed the pocket watch and placed it back on the table. Time is a thief, he whispered again, this time without anger, but it was also a teacher. The clock kept ticking, and for the first time that day, Elias listened, not with regret, but with acceptance. In his youth, Elias was a man made of fire. His blood burned with hunger, and his heart beat with a single goal: success. This chapter of his life was written in sweat, long nights, and the shine of gold. He believed the world belonged to those who were brave enough to take it. Elias was not afraid of hard work, and he was not afraid of sacrifice. Unfortunately, he never stopped to ask what he was sacrificing. Elias was a builder by trade and a merchant by spirit. He built stores, warehouses, and connections. He shook hands with powerful men and learned how money moved like a language of its own. To him, success was a mountain, tall and unforgiving, and he believed that climbing it required strength, focus, and sometimes stepping on others to move higher. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself it would all be worth it in the end. At home, waiting for him, was Clara. Clara was nothing like the world Elias chased. She had eyes the color of a clear summer sky, soft, calm, and full of warmth. Her heart found joy in small, ordinary moments. She loved quiet walks through the woods, the smell of fresh bread rising in the oven, and the sound of Elias laughing when he finally let go of his worries. To Clara, life was not about reaching the top. It was about sharing the path. Many evenings, she would stand behind Elias as he sat at the table, surrounded by papers and ledgers. She would rest her hand gently on his shoulder, feeling the tension locked in his body. "Stay for dinner, Elias," she would say softly. "The moon is beautiful tonight." But Elias rarely looked up. "I can't, Clara," he would reply, his eyes fixed on numbers and plans. "I have a meeting. I have work to finish. I have an empire to build." He would pause for just a moment, offering her a promise instead of his time. "We'll look at the moon later. When I am successful, when things slow down, we'll have all the time in the world then." Later. That single word became the lie Elias told himself for 40 years. Years passed, and Elias rose higher. His businesses expanded, his name gained respect and fear in equal measure. People listened when he spoke. Doors opened for him, his vaults filled with gold, contracts, and proof that he had made it. From the outside, he looked like a winner. But success came at a cost he refused to see. As Elias climbed higher, the air around him grew thin and cold. He became distant, impatient, and always tired. He didn't notice that while he was building walls of stone and steel, he was slowly tearing down bridges made of love. Dinners went uneaten. Conversations became short. Laughter faded from the house. Clara stopped asking him to stay. She still cooked, still waited, still hoped, but less each year. Loneliness settled into her heart quietly, like dust collecting in an unused room. She was married to a man who was physically present, but emotionally gone. Elias had become a ghost long before he realized it. Then, one evening, Elias returned home.
The house was silent. There was no smell of fresh bread, no soft footsteps, no blue-eyed woman waiting by the door. The air felt empty, heavy, unfamiliar. At first, Elias felt irritated. He told himself she must be visiting someone or resting. But Clara never returned. She hadn't left him for another man. She hadn't run away. She had simply faded away, her spirit worn down by years of waiting for a husband who always chose later over now. When she passed away, Elias stood beside her grave with pockets full of gold and a heart full of regret. Only then did the truth hit him with full force. His wealth could not buy back a single dinner he missed. His power could not rewind a single lonely night she spent waiting. His success could not bring back her smile. Now, sitting alone in his old age, Elias stared out at the mist-covered valley. The same mist that once hid his home now seemed to reflect his life, thick, gray, and full of things he could no longer see clearly. "I traded the sun for a handful of gold," he muttered to the empty room, "and now I am sitting in the dark with my riches." The ghost of ambition sat beside him, silent and heavy. It reminded him that success without love is an empty victory, and that time, once spent chasing mountains, never returns to the valley where the heart truly lives. The clock continued to tick, and Elias, at last, understood what his ambition had cost him.
The empire Elias built was strong, beautiful, and cold. It rose from the ground in marble, steel, and glass, clean lines, shining floors, and offices that reflected power. By the time Elias reached his 50s, he stood at the very peak of his success. His name carried weight. His signature could change lives. He walked through the halls of his company like a king, and every head bowed as he passed. People admired him. Some feared him. Many wanted to become him. Elias believed this was what winning looked like. During the day, he was surrounded by voices, meetings, and constant movement. Phones rang, assistants followed him, screens glowed with numbers that proved his worth. But when night came and he returned to his massive mansion, the noise disappeared. What remained was silence. The house was too big for one man. Footsteps echoed down long hallways. Rooms sat untouched, filled with expensive furniture that no one used. The walls reflected sound, but not warmth. Elias often stood still, listening, realizing that the silence was louder than any crowd he faced during the day. That silence carried memories. He remembered his son, Julian. Julian had been a gentle child with curious eyes. He didn't care about money or power. He didn't understand contracts or deals. What he wanted was simple: a father who looked at him, listened to him, and made time for him. One afternoon came back to Elias clearly. Julian was 7 years old. He had run into the room holding a piece of paper, his face glowing with excitement. "Look at this drawing, Dad," Julian said, lifting it proudly. Elias barely glanced up. His eyes were locked on a glowing ticker on his screen. Numbers were moving fast. A deal was closing. Millions were at stake. "Not now, Julian," Elias snapped. "I'm closing a deal." Julian froze. The paper slowly lowered. The excitement drained from his face. He stood there for a moment, hoping Elias might change his mind, but Elias didn't look up again. Julian quietly walked away. At the time, Elias felt justified. He told himself he was working for his family. He told himself sacrifices were necessary. He told himself he would make it up to Julian later. But now, as an old man, Elias understood something painful.
Closing a deal, he realized, was often just another way of closing a door to connection, love, and presence. Each ignored moment was a brick added to a wall between him and his son. Julian grew up. Years passed quickly. Childhood turned into distance. Distance turned into silence. Conversations became short, then rare, then almost non-existent. Eventually, Julian moved across the ocean, a new life, a new world, a life that did not include his father. Once a year, Elias received a letter. The letters were polite, respectful, empty. I hope you are well. Work is good. Take care. No anger, no warmth, just words without emotion. Elias had provided everything a child could need: education, security, comfort, opportunity. Julian never lacked money, but he lacked something far more important. He lacked a father's presence. Now, standing alone in his mansion, Elias understood the truth he had avoided for decades. You cannot replace time with money. You cannot buy back moments. And you cannot expect love to survive when it is never fed. Elias looked down at his hands again. They were old now, weak, shaking slightly. These hands had signed deals that built skyscrapers. They had shaped cities and moved fortunes. They had created an empire that would outlive him. But they could not hold on to a child's love. That realization hurt more than any loss of money ever could. He reached for the golden pocket watch and opened it. The ticking filled the room, sharp and heavy. Tick, gone. Tick, gone. The sound felt different now, louder, stronger, like a hammer striking stone. Each second felt like a brick falling out of the wall of his life, one by one, revealing the empty space behind it. Elias sat down slowly, the weight of regret pressing against his chest. He had built walls to protect his success, but those same walls had trapped him inside. They echoed now with memories he could not escape. He closed his eyes and saw Julian as a child again. Small hands holding a drawing, waiting for approval that never came. I was there, he whispered to the empty room, but I wasn't present. The walls did not answer. They only echoed the truth back to him. And in that echo, Elias finally understood that the greatest things he had ever lost were never written in contracts or measured in gold, but in moments he chose not to show up for. As the night grew deeper, the world outside Elias's window seemed to change. The mist thickened and pressed against the glass, moving slowly, almost like a living thing trying to find its way inside. The moon disappeared behind heavy clouds, and the room grew darker. The fire in the fireplace flickered weakly, throwing long, shaky shadows across the walls. Elias felt a sudden chill crawl up his spine. It was not just the cold of the night. It was a feeling, deep and unsettling, that he was no longer alone. His breath slowed. His heart beat harder. In the far corner of the room, where the shadows were thickest, something shifted. At first, Elias thought his tired eyes were playing tricks on him, but then the shape became clearer. A figure stood there, half hidden by darkness, silent but heavy with presence. Elias stared. The figure stepped forward. It was not a ghost in the way people imagine ghosts. It did not glow, it did not float, it did not make sounds. It was far more frightening than that. It was him. A younger Elias stood in front of the firelight, straight-backed, sharp-eyed, full of energy. His hair was dark, his face was confident, his chin was tilted slightly upward, the way it always was when Elias believed he was right and the world was wrong.
This was the Elias who believed time owed him everything. "Are you satisfied?" the shadow asked. The voice was familiar. It was Elias's own voice, but clearer, stronger, sharper. It carried no warmth, only challenge. Elias swallowed. "I have everything," he replied. The words sounded weak the moment they left his mouth. They echoed through the room and fell flat, like something hollow hitting the floor. His chest felt empty. His heart felt like a shell with nothing inside it. The shadow took another step forward, entering the dim glow of the fireplace. "You have nothing," the younger Elias said calmly. Elias frowned, anger and shame mixing inside him. "Look around you," the shadow continued. "You have a house full of expensive things, art, furniture, gold, but no one who laughs here, no one who calls your name with love, no one who remembers you with a smile." Each word landed hard. "You bought the world," the shadow said, "but you lost the now." Elias looked around the room. The walls were lined with paintings he barely remembered buying. Shelves held objects collected from places he no longer recalled visiting. Everything had value, nothing had meaning. The shadow's eyes softened, not with kindness, but with truth. "You spent your life chasing later," it said. "You promised yourself you would live someday. You thought happiness was waiting at the finish line, but life was happening while you were busy looking ahead." The younger Elias lifted his hand and pointed toward the small table. "The golden pocket watch." "You watched the hands move for 70 years, the shadow said, "but you never actually felt the time." The ticking grew louder. Tick, tick, tick. "You treated seconds like pebbles on a beach, small, worthless, easy to throw away. You never realized that each one was a diamond." Elias's hands began to shake. Memories flooded his mind: missed dinners, ignored drawings, empty conversations, unopened letters. Each second he had wasted now felt painfully sharp, cutting into him from the inside. A tear formed in his eye, then another. One tear broke free and rolled slowly down his wrinkled cheek. It was hot and heavy, carrying decades of regret with it. Elias had not cried in years. He had taught himself that tears were weakness. But now, standing in front of his younger self, he felt small and exposed. "How do I fix it?" Elias whispered, his voice trembling. For the first time, the shadow looked almost sad. "You can't go back," it said softly. The room felt colder. "You can't return to the moments you ignored. You can't reopen doors you chose to close. Time is the only thing that never offers a refund." The shadow began to fade. "No," Elias said weakly, reaching out. "There must be something, one thing." But the figure stepped backwards into the darkness. "All you can do," the shadow whispered as it disappeared, "is understand the cost." Then it was gone. The corner of the room was empty again. Only the fire remained, only the ticking clock, only Elias, alone with the truth. Tick, tick, tick. Elias sat very still. His breathing was slow and shallow. The visit from the shadows had left him stripped of his last excuses. There was no one left to blame. Not time, not fate, not the world. Only himself. He closed his eyes and pressed his lips together, holding back another wave of tears. He had spent his life running forward, never stopping to look around. Now time had finally stopped him. The mist outside the window pressed closer, and for the first time, Elias did not look away. The next morning arrived, quietly, but Elias did not. For the first time in many years, he woke up with a clear decision in his heart. That morning, Elias did something no one expected. He decided to let go. By noon, news spread across the city like wildfire. Elias, the powerful man, the wealthy builder, the symbol of success, was selling everything. His rare paintings, his priceless antiques, his mansion that looked more like a palace than a home. People whispered in disbelief. Some said he had lost his mind. Some said old age had finally caught him. Some said there must be a hidden reason, but no one truly understood. The auction hall filled quickly. Important people arrived in expensive suits. Wealthy collectors examined paintings. Businessmen admired furniture that once sat untouched in Elias's silent halls. Cameras flashed, voices buzzed with excitement. Elias stood quietly at the back of the room. He did not feel pride. He did not feel fear. He felt light. As each item was presented, memories surfaced, dinners that never happened, conversations cut short, rooms filled with objects but empty of love. He realized that these things had never been the problem, but they had kept him distracted from what truly mattered. To Elias now, all of it felt like dust. One by one, the items were sold. Applause followed high bids, smiles spread across eager faces, but Elias did not clap. His eyes drifted to his pocket. Inside was the golden pocket watch. He took it out and held it firmly. This one thing, this single object, he kept, not because it was valuable, but because it reminded him of a truth he had learned too late. Time is not owned, it is borrowed. Everything else he gave away. The money from the auction did not go into his accounts. Elias transferred it all into a trust, one that worked for orphaned children, children who had no parents to tuck them in, no one to attend their school events, no one to tell them they mattered. As he signed the papers, his hand shook slightly, not from weakness, but from emotion. He understood something deeply now. As long as he remained attached to things, he would never truly reach people. Gold builds walls. Presence builds bridges. When the auction ended, Elias walked out quietly. No speech, no announcement, just a man leaving behind a life that no longer fit him. That same week, Elias moved. He left the grand mansion with its echoing halls and cold marble floors. He chose a small house in an old neighborhood, simple, modest, warm. The streets were narrow, children played outside, neighbors greeted each other by name, not by status. Here, people asked, "How are you?" not, "What do you own?" The house had a small kitchen, a modest bedroom, and a front porch that caught the afternoon sun. Elias sat there often, watching life move slowly. For the first time in decades, he felt present. Neighbors waved, a woman brought him soup, a child asked him questions. No one knew who he used to be, and for the first time, Elias was grateful for that. At night, the silence was different here. It was not empty, it was peaceful. He could hear laughter through open windows, footsteps on sidewalks, life happening around him. Elias placed the pocket watch on his small bedside table. It still ticked, but now it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a chance. Each second felt heavier, more precious. He no longer treated time like pebbles to be kicked aside. He treated it like diamonds, rare, fragile, and worth holding carefully. As Elias lay in bed that night, he felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Not the hope of building an empire, not the hope of gaining more, but the hope of finally giving something real, his presence, his attention, his remaining time. He closed his eyes with a quiet understanding. He could not go back, but he could still show up. And for the first time in his long life, Elias slept without the weight of walls pressing in on his heart. One quiet afternoon, Elias sat at a small wooden table near the window of his new home. Sunlight fell softly across the surface, and dust floated lazily in the air. There were no ledgers on the table, no contracts, no numbers waiting to be checked. There was only a blank sheet of paper. Elias held a pen in his trembling hand and stared at the page for a long time. Writing this letter felt harder than building any empire he had ever created. This was not a letter about business, not about money, not about success. This was a letter about truth. It was a letter to his son, Julian. For years, Elias had written to Julian only when it felt appropriate. Birthdays, holidays, formal moments. His words were always careful, distant, and polite, like a businessman writing to another businessman. This time was different. He took a slow breath and began. "Son," he wrote. The word alone made his chest tighten. "I spent my life trying to buy you every happiness the world could offer, except my time." Elias paused. His eyes filled, but he continued. "I thought providing for you meant money, safety, and opportunity. I didn't understand that what you needed most was me, my voice, my attention, my presence." Memories returned without warning. Julian holding up a drawing, Julian waiting at the door, Julian learning to stop asking. "I am sorry," Elias wrote, his hand shaking now. "I am sorry that I valued your bank accounts more than your childhood drawings. I am sorry that I chose meetings over moments, deals over dinners, and later over now." The room was silent except for the soft scratch of the pen. "I am not writing to ask you for forgiveness. I am not writing to ask you to come back. I am only writing so you know the truth." Elias swallowed hard. "I used to believe being rich meant owning more than others, but now I understand something I didn't before. I am rich now because I finally have nothing left to lose." He stopped writing. Tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. Elias didn't wipe them away. He let them fall. They felt honest. When the letter was finished, Elias folded it carefully and placed it in an envelope. He wrote Julian's address slowly, as if each letter mattered, because it did. He walked to the post office himself. He did not rush. Each step felt intentional. When he dropped the letter into the box, his hand lingered for a moment. Then he let go. That evening, Elias traveled to the sea. The shore was quiet. The sky stretched wide, painted in soft blues and fading gold. The ocean moved endlessly, waves rolling forward and pulling back, steady and patient. Elias sat on the sand and watched. For most of his life, time had felt like something chasing him, pushing him forward, demanding more, never slowing down. Every second felt like a race, something to beat, something to use. But now, sitting by the sea, time felt different. It wasn't running. It was flowing. The waves did not rush. They did not hurry toward a finish line. They simply moved. Forward, back, again and again. Elias felt his breathing match their rhythm. Slow, deep, present. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about what came next. He wasn't thinking about yesterday. He was just there. Elias took the pocket watch from his coat and held it in his palm. The ticking blended with the sound of the waves. It no longer felt sharp or cruel. It felt gentle. He understood something then. Time was never his enemy. It had always been his teacher. Elias closed his eyes and let the cool sea air touch his face. He did not know if Julian would read the letter. He did not know if it would change anything. But for the first time, he had spoken from his heart instead of his position, and that was enough. The waves continued to move. The sun sank lower. The world felt wide and forgiving. Elias sat there until the sky darkened, feeling time not as something escaping him, but as something carrying him gently forward. And for the first time in his life, he did not resist it. One quiet evening, the sun had just dipped below the rooftops of the small neighborhood where Elias now lived. The air smelled faintly of bread baking and warm earth, and children's laughter echoed through the narrow streets. Elias sat on his small porch, the golden pocket watch resting on the table beside him, listening to the gentle rhythm of life around him. It was then that a small boy appeared. His clothes were simple and slightly worn. In his tiny hands, he held a broken wooden toy, a little soldier with one leg missing and its paint chipped away. The boy's eyes were wide, anxious, but hopeful. He looked at Elias and hesitated before stepping closer. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said softly. Can you fix this?" Elias felt a warmth rise in his chest. He had spent his life building things, towering skyscrapers, elaborate offices, walls of stone and glass, but he had never built or repaired anything that truly mattered, the hearts of people around him. Now, here was a small child asking him to do exactly that in a way. He smiled gently. "Of course," he said. "Let's see what we can do." The boy's eyes brightened instantly. He sat down on the steps beside Elias, watching every move with curiosity and quiet trust. Elias took the little wooden soldier carefully into his hands. The wood was rough and dry from years of use. The paint was faded. It was fragile, almost like a memory. Elias worked slowly, sanding tiny edges, gluing a missing piece, repainting it carefully with his old, shaky hands. The boy watched every moment, asking questions about the tools, about the colors, and about Elias himself. For 2 hours, they sat together on the porch. Time stretched in a way Elias had not felt for decades. There was no ticking clock pressing him forward, no ledger to check, no empire to manage. Just the boy, the toy, and the quiet rhythm of attention and care. As he worked, Elias realized something profound. This moment, these 2 hours, gave him a peace he had never known in 50 years of labor, in 50 years of accumulating wealth and power. He had built many things, but he had never experienced joy like this. Not in his mansion, not in his office, not even in the highest tower he ever constructed. This simple act of repairing a broken toy was worth more than anything money could buy. When the toy was finally fixed, Elias handed it back to the boy. Its leg was sturdy, the paint bright again, the soldier ready to march once more. The boy's face lit up with a radiant smile, and he hugged the toy tightly. "Thank you, sir," the boy said, exclaiming, his voice full of genuine happiness. "It's perfect!" Elias felt a lump in his throat. He realized that happiness was something you could not buy or plan for. It was something you gave and received in the small moments, in the acts of care that didn't make headlines or fill bank accounts. He looked into the boy's bright, trusting eyes and felt a connection he hadn't felt in years, a connection that money could never purchase. For the first time in decades, Elias didn't feel old. He didn't feel weighed down by the years of missed chances. He felt alive. He felt present. He felt human again. He leaned back on the porch and began telling the boy stories. Little adventures about faraway lands, builders who could talk to their creations, and wise old men who learned the secrets of happiness too late. The boy listened, rapt and wide-eyed, laughing at the funny parts and gasping at the exciting moments. Elias realized he was no longer wasting time. For the first time, he was not counting minutes or seconds, he was living them. Every word he spoke, every laugh he shared, every glance exchanged was a moment of life fully embraced. The evening sky turned a deep purple, stars appearing one by one overhead. The boy finally stood, hugging the toy and Elias once more. "Will you tell me more tomorrow?" the boy asked hopefully. Elias nodded, smiling warmly. "Yes, tomorrow and every day after that." As the boy ran off to join his friends, Elias sat back and took a deep breath. The house around him was small and humble, but it was full of life now. There was sound, laughter, and human connection. Not wealth, not emptiness, not silent walls that echoed back regrets. Just life. He picked up the golden pocket watch, feeling its steady tick.
But now, unlike before, the ticking didn't feel like a reminder of what he had lost. It was a celebration of what he could still have. Moments of connection, care, and presence. Time was no longer his enemy. It was a gift, flowing like the waves he had watched by the sea, patient, constant, and alive. Elias realized that these small human connections were far more valuable than any empire he had built. They were fragile and fleeting, yes, but that made them even more precious. He thought about Julian and the letters he had sent. He thought about missed dinners and words never spoken. But he also thought about the possibility of repairing the ties that still remained, starting with whoever crossed his path that day. For 2 hours, Elias rebuilt a broken toy. In doing so, he had rebuilt a piece of his own heart, a heart that had been trapped behind walls of ambition, gold, and regret for too long. And in that simple act of care, he discovered the secret he had spent a lifetime searching for. Happiness is not in what you own, but in what you give, and in the lives you touch while you are still alive. That night, as he finally entered his small bedroom, he felt a serenity he had never known. His hands, once calloused and strong from years of building, were now gentle, capable of fixing not just things, but hearts. And as he drifted into sleep, he whispered softly to himself, This is living." For the first time, he truly believed it.
It was a cold winter night. Frost clung to the windows, painting delicate patterns on the glass, and the wind whispered through the narrow streets of the old neighborhood. Inside his small house, Elias sat near the fireplace, wrapped in a warm blanket, the golden pocket watch resting in his hand. The gentle tick of the watch seemed to synchronize with the crackle of the fire, a quiet rhythm that filled the room with calm. Elias felt weak that evening. His chest ached slightly, and his breaths were shallow. Years of life, of hard labor, of ambition and regret had caught up with him. Yet there was a peace he had never known before, a sense that he had finally chosen the right path, even if much of his life had been lost to mistakes. He was staring at the watch, thinking about Julian and wondering if his son had ever truly read the letter he had sent weeks ago. The silence of the night wrapped around him like a soft blanket, until suddenly, a knock. Sharp, firm, insistent. Elias stiffened. The sound echoed through the small house, startling in the quiet. Who could be visiting at this hour, in the middle of a freezing night? He hesitated, then carefully rose from his chair. Each step to the door felt heavier than usual, but curiosity, and perhaps hope, pushed him forward. He opened the door. The cold air rushed in, biting at his face and hands. There, standing on the porch, covered in frost and snow, was a man Elias recognized instantly. His heart skipped a beat. Julian! His son! Julian's clothes were soaked from the snow, his cheeks were red from the cold, and his hair was damp. In his hand, he clutched a familiar envelope, the old letter Elias had sent, the one that had carried his confession, apology, and truth across miles and time. For a long moment, neither spoke, neither moved. The years of silence, the distance, the misunderstandings, the unspoken words, they all hovered between them, thick as the winter fog outside. Elias's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, anything, but no words came. All he could do was look into the eyes of the son he had missed, the boy who had grown into a man far away from his presence. Julian's eyes, however, were soft now. They carried no anger, no bitterness, just recognition, longing, and a quiet forgiveness. Without thinking, Julian stepped forward and wrapped Elias in a firm embrace. It was simple. It was silent, but it carried decades of lost moments, years of misunderstandings, missed birthdays, lonely dinners, and broken promises,
all melted away in that single embrace. Elias felt something he had not felt in decades, not the cold touch of money, not the rigid certainty of success, but warmth, real human warmth. He held his son tightly. The golden pocket watch, still ticking in his coat pocket, felt cold against his hand, but the warmth radiating from Julian was far greater than anything the watch could ever give. Time, the relentless, unforgiving time he had spent chasing, suddenly felt like a friend, bringing him the chance to repair something truly precious. Julian pulled back slightly, just enough to meet his father's eyes. There were tears in both of their eyes. Neither said a word, because words were no longer necessary. The years of distance and silence had been washed away by this unexpected moment, a moment that neither had dared to imagine until it became real. Elias's fingers brushed Julian's arm, and he felt a surge of emotion that no money could buy, no achievement could replicate. For the first time, he understood fully what he had been missing all those years. Not objects, not gold, not power, but moments of love, moments of presence, moments of being with the people who mattered most. He realized that the ticking of the watch, though still steady, no longer reminded him of what he had lost. Instead, it marked the seconds of something precious, the seconds of connection, of reconciliation, of life shared with someone he loved. They sat together by the fire for hours, talking softly, sharing stories, and listening to the sound of the flames. The past, with all its mistakes, lingered in the corners, but it no longer felt like a wall between them. It felt like a teacher, showing them how fragile and valuable every moment could be. As the night deepened and the wind howled outside, Elias finally understood something he had spent a lifetime searching for. That warmth, human warmth, could heal the deepest wounds. That reconciliation was possible, even when time had seemed to take everything away. That love, when finally given and received, was stronger than all regrets, stronger than the cold, stronger than the years lost. When Julian finally rose to leave, Elias embraced him once more. This time, the hug was lighter, filled with the certainty that they would no longer be strangers in each other's lives. They had found their way back, not through wealth or gifts or grandeur, but through honesty, courage, and the willingness to open the heart when it mattered most. Julian stepped out into the snowy street, turning once to wave. Elias watched him go, the warmth of the moment lingering like the fire that still glowed in the hearth. He returned to his chair, holding the golden watch, and smiled softly. For the first time, Elias truly understood the difference between the cold comfort of possessions and the living warmth of human connection. And in that quiet winter night, surrounded by the faint glow of the fire and the memory of his son's embrace, he felt a peace that no empire, no gold, and no achievement could ever have given him. The ticking of the watch continued, steady and gentle, but Elias no longer measured it with regret. He measured it with gratitude for life, for family, for the unexpected moments that could restore everything that truly mattered. And in that small, humble house, with snow drifting silently outside, Elias knew that he had finally come home.
Elias had grown weak. His body, once strong enough to build towering structures and close impossible deals, now trembled with the slightest movement. His hands were fragile, veined and thin, and his breath came slower with each step. Yet, despite the frailty of his body, his face was calm, peaceful. At last, the years of regret and longing had given way to a quiet serenity. That evening, Elias and Julian climbed a small hill just outside the neighborhood. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of pine and earth. The sky stretched wide above them, streaked with oranges, purples, and soft pinks. The sun was preparing to dip below the horizon, casting its final glow across the valley. They sat together in silence for a while. No words were needed. Julian's presence alone was enough. The small, humble house they now called home seemed far behind them. Here, on the hill, there were no walls, no ticking clocks reminding them of what had been lost, only the vast sky, the fading light, and the bond that had been rebuilt. Elias reached into his coat pocket and brought out the golden pocket watch. He held it carefully, feeling its weight, the steady rhythm of its ticking. He looked at Julian, and in that moment, the years melted away. This was not a watch for measuring time. This was a symbol, a lesson he wanted his son to carry forward. "Julian," Elias said softly, his voice cracking slightly, "this is yours now." Julian took the watch, holding it gently as if it were more than just an object. He understood, even without words, that it carried a story of mistakes, of lessons learned too late, and of the priceless value of presence. Elias continued, "But remember something very important. The hands inside this watch are not here to tell you how much time you have left. They are here to remind you that every single second you have is unique. Once it passes, it never comes back." He paused, letting the words sink in. The sun was lowering further, spilling golden light across Julian's face, highlighting the hope, the forgiveness, and the love that had finally returned between father and son. "Do not spend your time on things that cannot hold your heart," Elias whispered. "Do not waste it on gold or power. Spend it on people, on love, on moments that matter. Memories, laughter, and human connection are far more valuable than any treasure." Julian nodded silently, his own eyes glistening in the fading light. He placed a hand on his father's, feeling the warmth and the history embedded in those fragile hands. It was a connection that no years apart, no distance, and no misunderstandings could erase. The sun dipped lower, painting the clouds in brilliant streaks of red and orange. The valley below was calm, quiet, alive in its natural rhythm. Birds were returning to their nests, and a soft wind carried the scent of late summer flowers mixed with the crisp chill of approaching night. Elias closed his eyes. He did not see darkness. He did not feel the cold creeping into his bones. For the first time in his life, he felt that he had conquered time, not by building empires, not by counting gold, not by chasing success, but by finally understanding what mattered most: love, presence, moments shared. He thought back to the life he had lived, the mistakes, the greed, the years lost to ambition, and then he thought of the moments he had reclaimed: the letter to Julian, the child with the broken toy, the days spent simply being with people rather than objects. A soft smile spread across his face. For Elias, sunset was no longer an ending. It was a celebration of a life finally understood, a life finally lived in the right way. Julian sat beside him, feeling the gentle weight of the watch and the even greater weight of the love and wisdom it represented. They did not speak. They did not need to. Words had served their purpose long ago. Now, silence carried the depth of decades, a silence filled with understanding, forgiveness, and connection. The wind rustled softly through the trees. The last rays of the sun touched the valley, golden and warm. Elias took a deep breath and felt time flowing, not as something he could control, not as something he feared, but as a living, breathing current that carried every moment he had cherished. He thought back to all the moments he had missed, all the chances he had lost, and he forgave himself. He had learned, and he had acted. He had chosen the path of love and presence in the final chapters of his life. That was enough. That was victory.
Elias turned slightly, resting his head on Julian's shoulder. The warmth of human connection, finally found, outweighed anything he had ever built. The golden watch ticked gently in Julian's hand, a reminder of life's fragile, fleeting, and beautiful nature. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, Elias felt a peace he had never known. The darkness that followed was not frightening, it was quiet, it was natural. It was part of the flow of life, and for Elias, it was a comfort, not an end. He whispered softly, "Time was never my enemy. Love was always my teacher." Julian rested his head next to his father's, feeling the presence of the man who had finally learned what mattered most. In the fading light, surrounded by the warmth of family, the beauty of nature, and the steady tick of a golden watch, Elias drifted into a calm, eternal peace. The last sunset of Elias' life was not marked by sorrow or regret. It was marked by understanding, connection, and the profound realization that time, when spent wisely, could give more than any empire ever could. And as the stars began to emerge in the deepening sky, Elias closed his eyes for the final time, surrounded by love, knowing that he had truly lived.